Today is November 13th. Welcome to Native Calgarian. Oki, Naganago, Meko Chase Chestakomaki. My name is Red Thunder Woman. My English married name is Michelle Robinson, and I use she and her pronouns. Native Calgarian is being recorded on the lands of the Nitsitapi, which is the Blackfoot Confederacy. The Blackfoot south of the imposed U.S.-Canadian border are the Blackfeet, and north of the border are the Siksika, Gunai, and Bagani of the Confederacy. These lands are Treaty 7, signed September 22, 1877, with signatures that include the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Stoney Nakoda of the Wesley Chiniki Bearspaw Nations, and the Dene from the Tsuut'ina. I acknowledge all First Nation, Métis, Inuit, status, non-status across Turtle Island as the keepers of this land. All non-Indigenous are treaty partners with the government signing on your behalf. I honor the Blackfoot as the elders and members have been so kind to me in my Red Road journey. Elder Red Crane taught me how to pronounce my spirit name. I was born here in Calgary, or in Blackfoot Mohkinstsis, as Michelle Elliott, an English name which has afforded me privilege in an English colonial world. My mother is Northern Slavey Dene, or Satu Dene, but my Indian Act imposed status card by the Canadian government says Yellowknives Dene. My father is so Canadian, I am a daughter of the Mayflower and a daughter of the American Revolution while having an Indian Act imposed status card. I acknowledge my Dene lineage and I was born in Calgary, but my family is not part of the Treaty 7 signatories. My Dene lineage roots me in the land of the Hare people, also called the Great Bear Lake people in Treaty 11. I am a native to Turtle Island, and my Dene nation is a visitor to this area of Clincho Tine Indahe in Satu Dene, meaning Many Horse Town, named after the Calgary Stampede. Land acknowledgements are critical for creating a safer space for Indigenous, as well as honoring the host as a guest and acknowledging your role as a treaty partner. My humblest apologies to the Blackfoot elders and language keepers as I try to learn proper pronunciation. Any mistakes or misinterpretations will be on me. I encourage questions so that misunderstandings can be cleared up as soon as possible. I do not speak on behalf of all Indigenous, but I share what I know as I walk down my red road. If you're experiencing emotional distress after hearing anything we talk about today and want to talk, call the First Nation and Inuit Hope for Wellness Helpline at 1-855-242-3310. It is toll-free, open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. If you're a texter, you can go online to hopeforwellness.ca. And for non-Indigenous, there are distress center lines in your area, and a lot of them have texting now available as well. My Patreon account is Native Calgarian, where you can pledge and support. Thank you to my previous donors for already showing your support to my show. If you value listening and can afford to give, thank you. For those that cannot afford to give but listen in, I'd love to hear from you at nativeyyc@gmail.com, where you can send in your comments or questions. I now have a YouTube channel and would love to have you subscribe. And you can go to nativecalgarian.com for the latest podcast, pinned posts on social media. I want to give a shout out to my super loyal donors: Adam, Agent Indian, Alexandria, Beatrice, Ben, Beth, Brian, Kat, Celine, Christina, Crystal, Diana, Jacqueline, Jana, Jenny, Jessica, Jocelyn, Judy, Karen, Kathy, Kenna, Leah, Lisi, Marissa, Melissa, Morami, Natalie, Nathan, Rebecca, Rochelle, The Sprawl, Shara, Sharon, Tammy, Tiffany, Thalia, Vanessa, and Veronica. So with that, I want to welcome my guest that I'm so honored to have on my show, Izzy.
Hi, yes. My name is Izzy. I use she, her pronouns. Um, I come from a multi-generational settler background, and I've been, as listening to you and Indigenous people and racialized people, I'm trying to understand what that means a little bit more in a broader context. Um, I I want to say I'm coming not as a part of an affiliated group. I'm not coming as a member of any specific organization. I just happen to be transgender, and I want to speak a little bit to both TDOR, which is going to be when this airs on November 20th, and I want to talk about my own experiences with what most people refer to as the surgery, or gender reassignment surgery, also called gender confirmation surgery. Like, It has many names. I always call it bottom surgery because that's where it happens in your lower half. And You talk about a lot of really important and really deep topics on your show. I do, because of some of the issues and controversies around community and stuff like that, specifically LGBTQ2IA plus community, is I'm going to talk about specific things, and it's going to, like, death is going to come up, is one, name's going to come up. I but also things like genitals specifically. So I have this shirt. My black Trans Lives Matter sweater is in the wash right now, but I have this, and it says, if you can't read it, handcrafted artisanal pussy. Um, and you know, the reason I bring that up is that even though it's a very serious topic and we're talking about intense stuff, I'm a silly person by nature, and often the times where people listen to me is more when I make a joke out of things rather than be hardcore and serious all the time. So I'm going to try to find the right balance of giving these conversations the appropriate amount of seriousness and severity, but also be honest about my experiences. And sometimes they're funny, and sometimes they're really fun.
No,
So,
and I think
yeah.
every native knows exactly what that is, because, like, I mean, we make fun of everything that's ridiculous. I mean, it's serious and it's hurtful and it's awful, but man, if we didn't have humor, how else would we get through this?
Honestly, so, and it's funny you say that too, because, like, my grandma passed, right? And especially with your show, I've been thinking about, not just, complicitness or whatever, but, like, also what I inherit. And I don't take very well, but I do dish out. Like, my grandma, she was a cheeky little card player, and, like, she was a little brat, you know? And I think all the sense of humor and the love of music that I get, that's all from my mom, which comes from her mom in a way, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so absolutely. So the first thing I would like to talk about, I also have ADHD, so please, if you need to steer me on track, or if I talk too long, get me. So what the hell is TDOR? What is that? So one of the things that I try to do is, when given the space, how would I explain this to somebody if I wasn't trans? And so for TDOR, the example that I come up with is, well, Remembrance Day, you're honoring veterans, right? You're honoring people who have died, but they are combatants. They're soldiers, right? Regardless if they're fighting other combatants or they're fighting civilians, they are combatants. TDOR, similar to, but not the same as, missing and murdered Indigenous women, that's civilians. These are non-combatants, right? Underneath the systems that my ancestors created, these people are not supposed to be in a war zone or not supposed to be in combat. So it is murder. It is 100% murder. For these people are being murdered because they are trans. And it tends to be, it part of the reasons why I'm safer is because I live in a home in a higher income neighborhood a little bit, and because of my skin color, and because English was my first language, right? So I like your point about you can't speak to every Indigenous experience. I definitely can't speak to every trans experience because I'm not Indigenous, I'm not racialized, I don't face extreme poverty, but all of those things make it more likely for these people to be hurt or in danger or whatever. And it is because it kills me when I see maps of that there, especially in the States, how many laws are on the books where, oh, I didn't know you were trans. or, oh, does that make me gay, can still be used as a legal defense in court for our murders, right? And just because I'm less likely to be one of those victims, like, you know, it's a low bar to clear. It's like, well, you should be really grateful. You didn't get kicked out. You didn't get this or you didn't get that. And I'm like, yeah, and I am really grateful I didn't get kicked out by my parents. But wow, that doesn't, it doesn't feel like, yeah, it's not
Yeah.
like winning the lottery, right?
Yeah, no, it's like here's a really low bar, you know,
Right?
and you're
Yeah,
right there, and it's like, really?
yeah. And I wouldn't have even crossed that bar without not necessarily my hard work, but you know, like the hard work of my parents or just some systemic advantages that, you know, I did not create but were created for me. Um you talk about your name. You talk about Red Thunder Woman a lot. And I've been thinking about that more and more as I watch your stuff because this system is designed for me. Like it was designed by my ancestors. Like I have literal settler heritage back multiple generations. And yet, you know, I don't have kids. I'm not married. And the loopholes to change my name, to get my name. One of the special privileges that I have, and again, thinking about my grandma, is like, oh, unless something really fucked up happens, I'm going to be buried under my legal name. Like, whether it's a tombstone or a jar or an urn, even if I have no next of kin, I will be buried under my legal name that I've changed it to. And I'm like, it's weird to me for that to be a privilege, and yet it still is, even among white trans people. Um, and nothing to me sums that up more than I was in university a few years ago and meeting other people and queers on campus and finally getting the strength to talk to some of those people really helped me finally come out. But the first time I did TDOR, the actual ceremony back then, it might have, it, I don't know, this is a controversial practice, but we get the list of names and we would take turns reading the names. Like you would get up to the podium and read the names. And people are considering banning the practice or not doing that particular piece because it's so re-traumatizing for so many people. But you know, you read so many names and you can tell right away that this person wasn't buried in their name or they didn't have their names or in their obituaries they'll say that they died but they'll use their high school picture when they were murdered at 40, right? Because the family doesn't want people to know or all of those sorts of things, right? And it just, the ones that really broke me when I was reading, you know, unnamed 16, right? That was so devastating because even in death, they couldn't get that final dignity, right? Of getting their name right. And again, that intersects with people with names of different languages and indigenous communities and stuff like that. Yet, but even in the most privileged spaces, that stuff can still be denied to that person. So it's weird to me to like you mentioned the thing about how you were on like an environmental terrorist watch list because you were part of land defender protests. Like I have to rewatch to get the specific details. And my first thought was, if you decide to change your name legally through the colonial system, things like that might come up because you'll probably be fingerprinted and stuff like that. And the idea that you protecting your people and your home becoming a barrier from changing into your spirit name, that's absurd to me. um like, if people with some of the advantages that I have still, like, it's prohibitively, either there can be expenses or it can be, you know, just so much legalese to go through. Often you're doing it without legal representation, like the terms and conditions of an app or something. You're going through all of that stuff to change your name, and there's still so many barriers, right? There's still so much ingrained, and um that piece is something I really am trying to consider more. um and I'm gonna table that there, and, like, again, cut me off if you have things to say.
The
But
opposite. I actually am. I'm really glad to hear you say these things because,
oh, cool,
as
yeah.
when we founded Voices in 2016
That's right.
after the TO Black Lives Matter march was stopped, and we founded Voices. We had some of the worst pushback from the LGBT community because
Yep.
they just didn't see the problems. And you are so, the best part about having you on this show is articulating as you go through this process of transitioning, knowing as you do it, if you were Native, you'd have this many barriers. And when you were talking about the Trans Day of Remembrance, and people are talking about banning it because it's so traumatic, I mean, then you're
Just
not.
that particular practice, though, I want to make that clear, but
Yeah.
continue. Yes. Yeah.
The idea of saying their names, what I have always found interesting. So first and foremost, as a straight cis person,
Okay. Yeah.
I'm like, what the heck is Trans Day of Remembrance? And when I want to say it was around Occupy, so maybe 2010-ish.
Oh my God. Yeah.
That was when I was like introduced to this concept. I'm like, there are enough people that die in this world for being trans that we have a day of remembrance. And I found your parallels to missing and murdered Indigenous people the same right there, where we have our Remembrance Day is October 4th. Every year we do it, and it's mainly for those who are femme. And we're starting to bring more and more men in as we start understanding what two-spirit really means because of the homophobia and transphobia within our own community. and
Mm-hmm.
and that is a huge barrier. And I mean, lots of new immigrants come from colonized countries, and they were brought in because they're Christian, so they have this homophobia and transphobia within their communities. So racialized LGBTQ2 plus in this city and all across Canada are so vulnerable because of these phobias that were taught through this Christian lens. And now we're here, and now we have all these folks that are dying globally because of transphobia. So we
And
need to have a whole day of remembrance just because of
just
it.
for that, and the thing that you touched on, the one thing that always gets me is I've seen the argument that gay rights is as there's people who've used that as like, well, that's a colonial thing, and I'm like, but there's been preachers from the United States in the 50s who came in as missionaries to do the homophobia, right? So I don't think, going in and telling them to do gay rights is the answer, but we need to look at that process. And the thing for me is, and it can be, and I'm sure it's because of my privileges, well, and also that I have ADHD and I'm still trying to manage the symptoms to be more reliable. I don't know really how to be like a representative for like a whole group that's as diverse as trans, especially because I'm a binary trans person, but that the issues of colonialism and Christianity and all of those sorts of things, they do tie together. And to me, and I'm glad you brought this up, because no better example for me right now is some of the conversations about Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris is, on the one hand, being rightly so called out for helping engineer some of the transphobic policies that, you know, put trans people more at risk because they were sent to, you know, trans women being sent to male prisons, right? But in the same breath, it took only a couple of days for me to start seeing stories pop up in my feed of Kamala Harris secretly being a man.
Really? I haven't
Oh yeah.
seen that yet. Hola.
Oh yeah. And I'm like, there are so many layers to a person who is being, you know, how people are trying to hold her accountable for transphobia while that is also happening. And I get the whole, you know, Hillary too probably got the well, she's a man, but the memes I see, they're all Michelle Obama. All Michelle Obama. And it's this weird thing where this really ties in this conversation of, like, I'm the joke, like I'm the punchline, I'm like the inhuman thing that these women are being compared to. It's like, oh, she's secretly a man, that makes her like less of a person. Transness is being used to dehumanize them. However, because I'm white and when it's, you know, better weather, I tend to wear, you know, flowy clothes and I tend to be a smaller stature a little bit. My whiteness almost makes me less likely to be accused of the crime of being a trans woman. And that's, I don't know how to process that, to be honest. Like, I don't know. It's like,
Well, I'll give you a
there's
bit of a
cis
lens.
women.
Yeah. Yeah, I can give you a lens from my perspective, though.
Yes.
And
Okay.
then, so, like, you know, in the 1900s, they had the Darwin scientists, and they
Yes.
believed the darker your skin, the more of a monkey you were, right? So dark black people were easily
Yep.
slaves because they're monkeys. And then you come up to my people and they're not white, so they're lesser than, right? So that's that white supremacy coming through the Darwin theory.
Oh, it absolutely is. And I want to be careful because, again, I'm not black and I don't want to, but it's, that thought has really made me, and again, it's exactly what you're talking about, has made me recontextualize the Kimberly Crawshaw, how she experiences sexism in a racist way and racism in a sexist way.
Right.
Because a black trans women, I think, get the brunt of that. And I don't want to speak for them or all trans women, but that's, I have to acknowledge that privilege there. And so, like, another good example to me is representation. I am overrepresented, like in media and stuff. Like, these are, you know, it's settler, Canadian, white, typically. I'm overrepresented in that. And yet, I still, as a cis person, if somebody came up to you and talked about, well, trans women are in the washrooms and blah, 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 and they're all secretly bad or whatever. A lot of those people are working from this framework is, well, you don't just wake up and say that you're a girl, right? Like, that's not just how it happens. You just, ha, ha, ha. And the settler core of that ideology, the philosophy that kind of informs that, at least that piece of it, is that if I just say that I'm trans and therefore I'm trans, you can't falsify it. You can't prove it wrong. And so it's like, well, you could just say anything. But on the other hand, what level of evidence would they ever accept? I've gotten my nuts chopped off and my dick turned inside out. And yet some of those people will still make those arguments to me. And I'm not saying you have to have surgery or you have to have hormones or you have to even change your name. But I have done all of those things and I'm just a binary trans person. And there's still people going to be like, well, that's not enough. So the funny thing is that they're telling you that there's no way to falsify my being trans. but there's no way, they will not accept any evidence. Their position has no falsifiability. And the thing is, I grew up too with, I love cartoons and stuff. It's like, oh, haha, gender swap for a day. It doesn't work like that. It's not a Freaky Friday situation. When I was on hormone replacement therapy, which is, you don't have to be trans to have that. You could just have a medical issue that requires hormones or whatever. But on that stuff, I went through it. Oh, this is just going through puberty. It doesn't happen overnight. There's nothing that changes overnight. It takes years and years, just like doing puberty the first time. And you know what? If I knew I could have done puberty this way, I wouldn't have probably done it the first way. If there was a safe way for me to get puberty blockers personally, I would have done it like that.
I think dysphoria is something us cis people can never comprehend. And when I talk about cisgender privilege, like that's it right there. Like I dream being a woman.
Yes.
There's no, I would never imagine what it's like being a man ever.
But that's the thing. So one of the conversations that actually helped me start HRT, and I overshare, and part of me being able to overshare and have the privilege to do that in some ways can actually be really helpful to unpack some of that stuff. Because I sat down with a doctor and I had such a clear idea of like, well, I didn't hate my genitalia. I didn't want to like remove it with pliers. I did like, and there's some people who have dysphoria that intense.
Yep.
But I remember one of my formative memories was, kind of bummed that I can't detach my penis. That was a thought I had preschool, like before kindergarten, before Catholic school. And it's just like, well, that doesn't mean anything. But then the dreams of me being a woman, like you said, literally dream of being a woman. And I did. I literally, in a most literal sense, when I first started going through puberty, I was dreaming, I was like, what it would be like to be a girl. And it would always be super lucid, first person, like really realized and detailed. I'm like, wow. And the thing is that I repressed those dreams so hard that it's hard for me to dream in that way. And yet, some of those things, the thing that I like to say, one of the things I was also thinking about saying specifically for your show was I wanted to be a paleontologist and a chef in the first grade. Everyone, like all the adults in my life, joked about dinosaur bone soup. I wanted to be, YouTuber, basketball player, rock star, all of these things, big aspirations. The most improbable future, the one that seemed most impossible, is the one I've had, where in the middle of a pandemic, I received my surgery date, got to Montreal, all of that sort of stuff, and I've come back with this pussy. So I don't like, even a cis person getting vaginoplasty can be different. We talk about the surgery. You hear the surgery. You can get vaginoplasty or vulvanoplasty. You do not necessarily need the vaginal cavity. So what we think of as the surgery is two surgeries like for trans women. And that doesn't get into like those trans mask people or people born more likely to develop boobs than I was, getting top surgery or those sorts of things, right?
Yep.
So it's, you see how high school works in the movies, and I'm like, high school was not anything like it works in the movies. That's kind of what like transition was. But also the other thing is about use I appreciate people trying to acknowledge cis privilege, and I really do. And I feel hypocritical for saying this because I can be bad on this on the places where I'm privileged and stuff like that. But the weird thing is, I know people are cis. I know they don't get it. And you know what? I am the person who really, if somebody really does have genuine questions and I have the time and the space, I don't know everything. I am not a doctor. I want to try and guide people to the right information. But like, I've had people who say they're pro-trans and they've asked me intimate details and I've only after I've okayed it. And I've given them perspective on both the bodies of maybe their partners or themselves that they may have not looked at before. So many stories about peeing and the gender things about like guys versus girls peeing. I preferred peeing sitting down even with the genitals I had, with a penis. But part of the reason why I became, you know, the dribble on the seat or look at my dick and all of these sorts of things was because of the homophobia and because of the closet and because of you don't want to be the girl. The same people who say, at least in male culture, the same people who say the surgery doesn't make you a girl, HRT doesn't make you a girl, all of those sorts of things are the same people who will say, well, don't eat at A&W because their burgers have more estrogen or hormones in them and you'll eat them and grow tits and the end of the world. So it's the hypermasculinity that says, oh, you dating a trans woman makes you gay is the same thing as don't be weak, don't be effeminate. It doesn't like it doesn't seem like it makes sense, but it does come from the same space.
Oh, it does. And that's why misogyny is what is killing Indigenous women, because it's racism and misogyny. But like, and I tell people, white women are not safe in this fucking province or this country, frankly, because when I grew up in a predominantly white place. And lots of kids were getting the crap kicked out of them by their hyper masculine white dad. And then their wives were getting the crap beaten out of them. And I remember when the owner of the bowling alley was killed, and the RCMP brought in this white trailer and it sat in their parking lot for a year, but that wasn't really properly dealt with. So it
No,
was such a
yeah.
clear message to me as a young girl that, you live in a place where the RCMP doesn't care if your partner kills you. And that had nothing to do with a racial lens. That was just you're a small town little girl and you do not matter in that bigger picture of this country. And that was clear. But I grew up in domestic violence. Like my first memories of life are watching, domestic violence. So like that was like in put into my brain at a young age that as a child you are lesser than, as a woman you are lesser than. So now add trans to it, add homophobia to it. Of course, that all comes from that same toxic workspace where, you know, like I grew up in the small town where they had a hockey town, like it was a huge hockey town. And so like there was this constant hyper masculine conversation on a regular basis. And women were expected to act a certain way and all sorts of things. And I had a younger friend who was a lesbian who wanted to play hockey, and that was a huge problem. It was a problem, not a, oh, great, let's let them play. It was weird and awkward, and like people were still getting my husband was getting police escorts out of the arena as a referee, as like a 16-year-old referee, 14-year-old referee, because of the hyper masculine, drunk parents that thought it was perfectly acceptable to beat the crap out of a 14-year-old ref. Like that was my upbringing.
So the two things, like, so one, back to voices, is that stuff can come from the house. Like LGBTQ community is not immune from those sorts of things, and it's something that we need to learn. But the other side of that is, I think my parents try to have it both ways, where like they wanted it to be better, but they didn't want to be sheltered. And in some ways I felt more sheltered. And in some ways, I didn't have the same amount of stuff that they went through, but I also didn't have the resources to navigate some of my own things. And you talk about the hypermasculinity and stuff. I went right back to religion class, Catholic high school, and there was a girl on the football team, and even caked in that culture a little bit. I'm like, God, if she can play, she can play. And like even other like dudes on the football team, it's like they're like, oh yeah, and if anything goes wrong, they blame her when it was clearly not her fault. And it's like even the football bros get this. Come on, teachers, what are you doing? The coaches didn't get this, but the kids did. The there was something else I was gonna say on that too. But yeah, it's some people might find this hard to follow. It's we talk about so many things, but personal responsibility. So I have always felt and it's specific, the small town culture or the hockey culture of personal responsibility. I get the appeal of like it is mathematically absurd to assume that Jason Kenney should have personal responsibility for everybody who doesn't follow mask protocols. Like he can't just be like, you have to wear a mask and you have to wear a mask. That's weird. But the thing is, and as I try to learn more stuff, the thing is I'm thinking about more is personal responsibility for what? Are you the premier of Alberta? Am I the premier of Alberta? Yeah, as individuals, I think we might have personal responsibility to do our best to follow the COVID protocols. But Kenny, if he says, oh, it's personal responsibility, in a way, he gets to skirt responsibility for making any government policy or, having a hardline stance. And it's a conversation I have even with people I love. It's like, well, you're just not personally responsible. You just no. And I'm like, there's addiction in my family, like maybe not my immediate family, but in my extended family. And you know what? Hammering on about, well, you're bad. You did this. That didn't make them less of an alcoholic. That didn't get them help. That didn't get them support. Like that's what got them support was the ICU. At some point, we need to acknowledge that our system focusing on personal accountability allows people who have the levers of power to then not be held accountable for decisions they've made in office with more tools and resources than the average person typically has. It's so hard to calculate the damage and death of things like austerity, right? So then these people can make policies where, folks on disability have less access to money, but we don't count them as death. We don't think of that as like a manslaughter case as we would as an individual. There's a particular transphobe who has a book who talks about, well, you should, fight for your individual rights. You should take risks as a person, even if it may be impact your safety or somebody else's. You should take chances as an individual. As soon as you do that as a group, like trans people fighting for rights, we're all doing individual personal risk. We are doing stuff that may have negative health, may have risks to our health because other people treat us like shit, right? But because it's a group, suddenly it's not as cool anymore. There was another really good example of that I was gonna touch on.
Well, you know what? I would like to give an example of that.
All right. Yeah.
So if the Canadian government can institute Indian residential schools, our friend Spirit, said very clearly to Justin Trudeau, then you can institute, healing healing centers. You can institute that. So from my point of view, like, it is the
Exactly.
responsibility of AHS, Alberta Health Services, to be providing culturally relevant intergenerational trauma healing that allows us, you know, smudge and all the cultural perspectives that we should have, but they don't. That's the bottom line.
And because you bringing it up as a collective, and I don't want to appropriate, and I don't want to, you know, conflate them all as the exact same thing, but they have roots in the similar things, is that it's the, if you have the stiff upper lip, you know, the no pain, no gain, you can be an inspo porn story, right? And it's like how you overcame all the trials. But like, whether it's immigrant communities who have been pressured by their parents because they came from poor backgrounds, or indigenous communities, or the Black communities across, you know, the world, but, you know, Canada and the US, all, I've seen it across the board that the ability to rest, to not overperform, to not, you know, that is so, well, you're slacker, or you're not doing enough, or whatever. And it's like, even people I dislike within the system who are as like settler capitalist got, like, no, if you give them some days off and let them observe holidays or have spiritual practices, they will be healthier and do better work when they're, you know, as paid laborers. And that's still very like capitalist perspective on it, but like, yeah,
It's so easy though. Like, the 6 days that we have off for Christmas to New Year's Eve, if you gave the Indigenous people that around Sundance so that they could travel to the Sundance, do their 4 days Sundance, travel home, like, and instead of Christmas and that, like, you, my husband, he's always said, you know, if you decide you have whatever 12 days or, you know, 14 days of holiday per year, and you get to decide how you choose to use it. Really that simple, you know. And that could be done for the Muslim community when they do their fast and they need, you know, a day off or two so that they can rest properly. You know, it's so easy to institute that as a religious or spiritual holiday, but we choose not to do that. We still put it around the Christian perspective of, you know, that religion.
well, and the thing about Christianity kills me, because honestly, if Jesus saw what his using, like, if he saw that his religion was being used for colonialism as he spoke out against Roman colonization, I think he would be pretty pissed. But that's just my personal take. The other thing, like,
And they think right now, though, that we are experiencing this pandemic and global warming because the end of days is coming. Like, they literally are encouraging the end of days because they see it as part of their religious, like, coming of whatever their bloody bullshit is. And that's the worst part, because, like, we're kind of at the point of no return with this climate change now.
yeah, yep. I the religion part is an interesting thing, because it goes back to for me, the falsifiability thing. It's, you know, I was told, you know, faith is important and all of those sorts of things. One second, I just gotta. But the idea that I could believe that I'm trans, I mean, that as a faith argument wouldn't be supported, right? So, you know, who's in power decides what questions we get to ask, even in communities of philosophy or faith or whatever. But
you know, in the Indigenous community, and I say this strongly in my own family, because of Sacred Heart Residential School up in Fort Providence, my family strongly believes you never divorce your husband. Doesn't matter if he hurt your kids, didn't matter if he beat you. You never, never, never divorce your husband, ever. And to this day, my family is so Catholic. My mom and my granny specifically are so Catholic that even despite all the domestic violence and that, they believe they're going to hell for me not being Catholic, you know. And that's what that Indian residential school did. You know, it beat and beat it into them, the spiritual abuse. So, and I bring it up because, that self-hate of being Native is bad. That self-hate of being trans, gay, lesbian, that's taught, and that's why the two-spirit issue is so important. But there is not the numbers in this inquiry. I have the inquiry right in front of me by chance. I just happen to have it. You do not have two-spirit numbers in there. There
Yeah.
are no
Oh,
two-spirit numbers. We do not
that's
have accurate numbers because of our own transphobia within our own community and because of the settler colonial lens of Christianity.
I had a friend who, talking about Catholic heritage and stuff, this friend, he fed me when I was hungry and he clothed me when I was naked. And, well, don't change different or don't use a different name. And then I did, and then I stopped hanging out with him. But the last conversation I had with him in person was, we think it's you pushing God away. And I'm like, you know what? If God is as understanding, or creator or creators, if there are, and spiritual questions, right? I am agnostic mostly, but you know what? If he's so perfectly understanding, he would understand I need a relationship with myself too, to not feel suicidal, to
Yeah.
not. And I don't. One of the reasons I made this shirt, even though it's supposed to be a funny joke, right, is I've been in Pride. I've marched in the Pride parades, and even though there's floats of people who, they sell money or weapons or whatever to people who do homophobic things in other countries. And, global capitalism, it's hard to get away from complicitness in any of it. But I've marched in Pride. What am I proud about? Like, pride in what? And, and I come back to that what, and I'm like, I'm so often debating whether I exist or whatever, whether it's online or offline, or negotiating how to be safe in a community that is built for me. I live in pretty bougie suburbs, kind of, and in that system that is built for me, navigating that, I'm debating these things. I'm proud of this surgery. I'm proud of doing it. There is a lot of spiritual closure in a way. Kind of circling back to something we touched on. You don't understand as a cis person the trans stuff, right? Still French, still colonialist, but deja vu, right? You know the term? In a broad sense, or in a like a psychological sense, it can be overcompass any feeling that is feeling at home in the unfamiliar. The familiar feeling the unfamiliar feeling more familiar to you. That's what I call gender euphoria. That's what gender euphoria is like to me. I remember being a little kid and I would listen to certain songs. And as a kid, I would say, my brain would feel chemically different by listening to like a girly pop song. And the same people who would say you're reading emotions into the past, it's like, no, gender euphoria was that feeling, because that feels very similar to what I feel when I get gender euphoria now. It's like this intense combination of the aha moment, the feeling so overjoyous, but also this huge amount of relief. It's those emotions. It is this familiarity and this closure in stuff that is foreign to you. But we only hear about deja vu. gender dysphoria, what often people think about what being trans is being born in the wrong body, which is not what it is. Gender dysphoria is like jamais vu, or I'm probably not saying it right, but jamais vu or jamais vu, and that is when the familiar, the only things you ever known, are unfamiliar, like dissociation or depersonalization or dysmorphia for people with eating disorders or stuff like that. It's the thing that you look in the mirror every day, or your home that you've lived in every day doesn't have that feeling of home. That's what gender dysphoria is like. That it's, the mask you put up and saying, I'm comfortable in my home and I'm comfortable in the scenario, because you feel like you can't actually do what you're comfortable with. I know guys who were like super hard ass and super like, I have to be a man, blah, 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 but their mom let them play with dolls as kids. It was the policing of those gender roles and stuff where, it's forcing women to do makeup and look in certain ways and whatever, and it's forcing men to not, you have to be manly in sportsmanship or whatever, rather than just letting, I grew up with kids where girls, played rugby and could still do full faces and makeup, right? I grew up with even hypermasculine dudes, they would do drag or whatever and thought that was interesting and stuff like that. And it just seemed more free. It just seemed so much more liberating. It just seemed like less shit to worry about. And often when I'm dysphoric or transphobic against myself or other people, it really comes back to being, well, you were a guy and you're not supposed to date guys. That's, even when I came out to family, it was so hard for me to admit that I was either bi or pansexual, because I would admit to attraction to dudes. Longer back than, like, it would have maybe changed how they thought of how I was in the past, because it did not just happen because of HRT. So I really didn't know how to, even with coming out, I didn't know how to explain that I was attracted to dudes without having to also unpack homophobia conversations rather than just transphobia conversations. And it's one of the other things I was saying was, in all the places I was supposed to not find God, like whatever feeling of community or spiritual goodness or the Holy Spirit or whatever I felt in church, I have felt that even more laying next to my gender fluid or non-binary partners, not being judged for my body, or doing some of the things that I've been told were sins, and I felt so relieved in the same peace that people had told me that was, the love of God. And I used to think in the story of the story of Wizard of Oz, that I was the scarecrow, that I was the idiot, that I didn't know anything. And part of that was being the youngest and stuff like that. I'm the cowardly lion, because underneath all of my anxiety and the stress or my unassuredness is because I know who I am, and I have known, but I've never known how to articulate it. So I didn't think anyone would accept it. And that's just me. Not everybody knows. But I had the knowledge, but could not recall or could not explain or could not articulate. And I learned to be scared. I learned to be afraid. Even in my parents' house, Like they didn't know everything about trans stuff, and they didn't know everything about gay stuff. But even in that house, like, I think part of the reason why it did take some work for my parents to accept my trans stuff was just because they didn't have information. If they had information that I did, they worked so hard to be there for me when they didn't understand, even as a little kid. And that made me so confident until that was weaponized against me and somebody first called me a mama's boy. That the healthy relationship I had with my mother was somehow a bad thing has impacted my relationship with this person I love to this day. It doesn't seem like that big a deal, but it's taken a lot of work to reestablish that closeness I've had, that I cherish with my own mom. And I'm still lucky enough to be living in her house and my dad's house. And that's the bare minimum, right? That's going back to the, wow, I'm so lucky that my parents did try, and even if they don't understand, that they've done at least enough of the work that I wouldn't be here without them. Like, straight up, they came to Montreal with me. How lucky am I as that? And, like...
But you know what? I'm going to say this as a
Yeah.
mom. I can't, like, as much as I grew up in that way, when I had my daughter, my life changed. I mean, my vagina changed a lot too.
Yeah.
And it took about 2 months to be able to heal that again.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah, but I mean, when I had my daughter, my life changed. And I mean, the way I looked at everything in our society changed dramatically. And I, to this day, cannot imagine rejecting my daughter because she's decided she's a boy. Now we could have a long conversation about how boys are more acceptable than girls, but that's not the point. The point is I can't imagine rejecting my daughter because, like, when you when you love your child so unconditionally, it is impossible to understand, this decision that, oh, you're no longer my child. And I witness it and I see it through the LGBTQ2 plus community, and the homeless issue, obviously a huge part of that because of it. And yeah, I lose so much respect for those parents who reject their children. I cannot comprehend what kind of, like, I had the worst global or social programming. How do you reject your fucking kid? I can't wrap my brain around loving a so-called God so much that you reject your fucking kid. What the fuck is wrong with you?
I had a friend who said it even best, because she grew up in a very militant atheist household.
Sure.
And still ran into that stuff. He was so obsessed with survival of the fittest, but we've changed that to a survival of the strongest, not survival of the one who adapts, or the group or the species that adapts well to the situation they're in. That's what survival of the fittest means. Being able to adapt to the circumstances. And the thing is the very people who tend to hold on to a lot of power, and I can be guilty of that too, but they're so focused on being the strongest. Like, even lions end up worm food, right? Like, there's a reason it's called the circle of life, right? But about the kids thing, I don't know. I think I was so kind of like expected to be the grandchild provider and I was like, well, I'm going to be a dude. I'm going to get married to a lady, and I'm going to do that.
Have the babies. Gonna
Yeah.
have the babies.
I honestly think that my belief adamantly that I'm not going to have kids comes more from a place of, I was not given the emotional tools to be a good mom. Well, I might have been given I didn't want to be a dad. I was expected to be a dad, but that's not the parent I wanted to be. And yes, I can change that now, but I've had to be, it's this weird thing where people looking on the outside is like, well, Izzy can't do anything for herself, or she doesn't take care of herself, or you baby her too much, or whatever. I've had to be my own parent when it comes to being trans. Like, I've had to do that. And um not saying my mom didn't help or whatever. And my mom, she loved me unconditionally, but she still had a lot of stuff to work through because you know, oh, I wish I was there for you, or I had this idea of you that's changed. And I, on the one hand, it's like, well, it's not about you, it's about me. If I don't give her that space, whether that's fair or not, and I'm not trying to slam my mom, but giving my mom that space helped her find trans parents and stuff to get what they're going through as parents. She just needed support. She just needed information. She just, that was the thing. And the same people who say, well, I'm not going to pretend, or I'm not going to, it goes back to, what evidence would you accept for your kids being trans? What, you know, circles back to that whole thing about, there's people who are going to say, well, just because you have a vagina now, well, I was born with a vagina. That's the point of the shirt. Just because it's new, just because it wasn't attached to a uterus, well, it's just a cosmetic surgery. And I'm like, well, tell that to my fucking nerve endings. Like, tell that to the fact that I pee different. I pee different. That's a huge change. But yeah, it's this, the devil you know is better, right? It's that cultural mentality of, you stiff upper lip, you persevere, you have to succeed, and then if you don't succeed, it has to be because the natives are taking your jobs, the immigrants are taking your jobs. It cannot be that expecting you to handle it all on your own without the support network, repressing all your feelings. It can't be any of that. And I'm just like, even though I know I perpetuate it, I've always thought that was bullshit. And one of the most interesting things, I've actually found this. Hold on. So I actually have this. My great-grandfather bought land from the CP rail. So I'm pretty sure it wasn't ceded. And he had a farm and an orchard there. And this comes from that orchard. And Pop's kid, my grandfather, Ted, he died before I ever came out to him. My grandma's been great. He wouldn't get it, and he wouldn't understand. But he would see me walking with Pop's orchard in my hand. And he wouldn't give a shit. He would be so elated that I would have taken up this kind of unique part of my ancestry, that would mean more to him than, yeah, I'd have to correct pronouns like every other minute, but he would be ecstatic that I carry a piece of him in the family around. And so the thing for me is, one of the most interesting parts of my ancestry is that there can be such a commitment, and a stubborn commitment, to how the way things are and not changing them. And, even when it backfires, but also never really fitting in as much as they want, or wanting something different, or wanting something more. And to me, people will see, my transition as a rejection of my heritage or the cultural values. I don't know if I'll be buried in a Catholic graveyard. I don't know if they'll let me do that. I don't know if my body will be allowed to be buried with family members of mine. But in a way, when I actually have when I actually realize I have the courage to challenge them on some things, that to me is the part of the heritage I want to keep on. Not necessarily the privileges, not necessarily some of the things I think they did were problematic. I think they were well-meaning, but it's the fact that because of the formative memories, I joke either that transitioning was a fulfilling of my destiny or me taking my destiny in my own hands and deciding it for myself. Some people will say we're born this way. I say people will just try to find a gene and fix it. People will say it's a choice. People will just try to conversion therapy. I don't care. I am trans. My name's changed. I've gotten surgeries. I've gotten HRT. Facts don't care about your feelings. I'm here. This is who I am. And that piece, I think, I've honored the parts of my family's legacy that I think are worth keeping by being trans, by defying some of those things. And I think if we were willing to give up some ways we know and actually venture into something new, it would be better for us and for other people. And I feel that the more I get to own being trans, that I'm able to say that I'm trans and that's a good thing and that's a part of myself I don't want to hate anymore, I tend to be able to do more things and challenge more behaviors or be better in other ways. Slowly, it's healing. It's the joke I've made is healing from the surgery feels like healing from years of other stuff. And I'll say, I've had it late, even among non-white or even among white non-trans people. I think I've had a pretty good life, but I want other people to have that. There, you know, there's a lot of baths, there's a lot of showers, and recovering from this procedure. The first month you are doing the recovery routine 4 times a day. It's going to be harder in a place if you live in a town or a reserve under boiled water advisories. So, putting people to work to build systems that get more clean water to reserves, that's jobs, that gets more people access to some of the recovery routines if they also get surgery.
Can we talk about the fact, though, that you had to leave Calgary to go to Montreal? That's kind of a big thing.
Oh my God. During the pandemic, too. Oh, that was a pain in the ass. Oh my God. Montreal was great, and I had a particularly good experience in there, but I am, tiny and white, so that might have been a part of it. But yeah, COVID hit me so bad. I was leading a support group for trans folks, and COVID was so bad, I didn't have the emotional energy to participate in the group on Zoom, never mind lead the group via Zoom. And it was like, oh my God, I had such a mental health break at one point. And after I got through dealing with that, I got my surgery date, which I'd been waiting for so long. And I'm like, during COVID, there's no way. I've been tested, don't have COVID. I'm back. I'm safe at home. I had face shields. I had masks. I'm not the only one who had to go during COVID either. There's people I know my age, they all went around the same time.
So I'm trying to understand, though, but
yeah,
why did you have to go to Montreal?
Oh, yes. Okay. Sorry, I'm a step ahead. So the place in Canada that does that surgery is in Montreal. So there's the place is called Montreal GRS, and there is maybe 2 surgeons. and it's an international enterprise, but if you get approved for funding for surgery, or you basically, if you get the surgery in Canada, that is the only place you can do it, because that's the only place that does the surgery. Many people do top surgery. There can be other procedures you can get done around. It is the only place. Some people who have more money might engage in medical tourism and stuff like that, but it is the only place. It's covered if you get approved, and you have to be out for a year, and 2 psychologists have to sign off on the fact that you actually want it. And oh my God, there's like 1,000 issues in that. And then you wait, and part of the reason why the wait list is so long is Montreal's the only place you can go. There are some, like, I think there are some practical reasons, but I have also brought up, it's like, why couldn't we have trained more surgeons to do this in more places, so I didn't have to fly across the country to do it in the middle of a pandemic? And again, there might be people who know better than I, but I loved what he did, and I was a positive customer. I still think that's horseshit. I absolutely resent the fact that it's not more accessible across the country or across multiple countries. And like international travel right now during COVID, I wouldn't recommend it, but the wait lists are so long. It's just, they send you booklets of things you got to remember, multiple booklets. If I didn't have a non-ADHD person who was really good with reading documents and legalese and stuff like that, I would have been hooped, because it is a covered surgery, and you still pay like $400. Well, I think for the dilators, they're $300 themselves. And then you have to buy all of this, like, that's the most my family, I think, has ever bought in pads, because there used to be so many boys in the house. Pads. I dilate on these little like puppy pee pads things, so like nothing gets on my sheets. You gotta buy those. Saline or what is it? Distilled water for saline solution. Like, there's a lot of little expenses that can eat up, right? It's a weirdly, like, any recovery is intensive, but like, you have to do it 4 times a day, and you have to try to do it at very specific times a day. It's not built to be the most accessible thing in the world, the system in the world. Our society focuses much more on treatment than accessibility. And it's the thing that I keep hammering on, is if you had more accessibility, you would need less treatment. And that's true of the ADHD stuff. And I find just even with the privileges, actually accessing the information, proper information. I've joined Facebook groups of women who've had this particular surgery or those particular surgeries, and they literally be like, well, wait, mine's doing this. I don't know that. And it's like, well, and then another girl was like, oh, on page 7 of your booklet, it'll say that this is an issue here. If you can, it's like, it's a Facebook group for pussy surgery that we have to manage. And it's so, I'm so glad, but it's like, that's a lot of labor for, kind of volunteer community and stuff like that. And
yeah, I can feel that when it comes to reproductive health, because as you know, we have zero sexual education in the system. So you can imagine how fucking awful and traumatizing stillbirth and miscarriage and all of these things are when you can't, when you have a C-section and you can't breastfeed. Like, this is fucking traumatic shit. And so I did kind of understand where your parents were coming from, where, yes, it's about you, but they're mourning the loss of their son, and they're gaining the birth of a daughter. And, so, I mean, if we need freaking support networks for miscarriage, for breastfeeding, for all of these things, like, there's to say that we don't have the infrastructure and networking for this is actually an understatement. If it wasn't for volunteer work, here's the thing that pisses me off as a person. All of the work that you do for a support group, all of the work that you have to do to look on these forums, like when I was going to have my daughter, the mommy forums, and learning about all of this, like that that's a lot of hours of volunteerism that's never accounted for by anyone because it's not under the umbrella of some colonial nonprofit. And that's the
Or
irony.
for-profit labor.
Yeah,
Right? It's
exactly,
not that.
exactly.
Yep.
And so it's like our whole lives are devoted to unacknowledged volunteer work in so many different ways and capacities, and that is life. Like even for me right now, I mean, I'm trying to manage how to run a household, which is a mess. My daughter's homeschooling, you know, my forums, my podcast, my like there's a million things, and I don't know how to say no. I don't know how to set all these boundaries all the time, even though I literally spent my 20s learning more positive boundaries after growing up in domestic violence and having really crappy boundaries on mental health, like all these things. Like it's like, hola. And then
This
we go to school to learn the wrong military history, the wrong history, white supremacy, and science through a white supremacist lens. Like we learn all of this
Mhm.
stuff, and it's like, what the hell are we doing as a society? What the hell?
So the one thing that's interesting is that like um the thing was is about mourning is that I feel like I have to make space for people who well, I have to mourn the person you were. And it's like the thing is that if I was allowed to be the person I was, you would never have had to have mourned anything. And the other thing is I've have had a pretty excellent and privileged life, and I still people are like, well, don't look back, don't regret. Or it's like, no, I get a chance to mourn some of that because I know what that kid was feeling at the time, right? And I feel so guilty because like with ADHD and stuff, like my mom has had a lot of stuff on her plate too, and I've added so much extra things to her, and she's been so good and so helpful, and I really like I really struggle with I struggle with my own issues, so I'm causing issues for other people, right? Sort of mentality. And it's like the same people who say you're not tough or you can't do it on your own. Or what is it? It's like the conservative mantra, not just them, but it's like well, don't be a snowflake or don't be a victim. And I'm like, what do you mean? Someone like it's a pretty morbid thought in a way, but it's like, you kill me or you hurt me, you're not going to change the fact that I got this surgery. Like, I'm no victim. I've had it pretty, like, I, with all of the stuff, it's like, I still got, HRT. I still got surgery. So people who could literally kick my ass and break me in 3 different ways could like even entertaining the idea of getting the knots chipped off and the dick turned inside out, yeah, they couldn't handle that. But more to the stuff about the C-section and all that unpaid volunteer work and stuff like that. I had a good thought, but I remember people are like, "Well, where are you going to be in 4 months?" And I'm like, "Yeah, okay, but like." The actual recovery routine is dilating, right? And it is so in the first month, which just passed for me, you have to insert one thing into your vagina for 5 minutes, after you get your space set up to do so, so that's pads, all of those sorts of things set up, then take it out, and then for another 25 minutes, put a different, bigger thing in your vagina for 25 minutes.
What?
Well, because the first one's just to warm you up for the second one. You're basically putting not fun dildos or business dildos into your vagina for like half an hour. And so it doesn't, it's like an earring. You don't want it to close the piercing. Do you know what I mean? Like, if you ever had an ear pierced and then it grew back too much, it's like that, but your vagina. You just don't want the hole to close as it's healing up, right? You want to heal it up properly, so it's it's stretching your, and it's doing so in a doctor approved, recommended way with stitches, so you're not overstretching it or anything like that. You do that 4 times a day, and after each one, you either have to bathe or do a shower, and you have to do dildos, or not dildos, the douching after each one. So it's about for the first month, it's like a full-time job. Like,
This
at
sounds
least
awful.
it's a lot. It's a lot. I've gotten to the point where it's kind of boring. I'll just throw on your podcast or throw on Netflix or something, or play a game. But it's it's like just I gotta do very specific surgery specific Kegel exercises 4 times a day. But it's its own thing.
When I gave birth, I did not have to do this after I gave birth.
That's the thing. Have I ever had to give birth? No. Would I know what that's like, or having a womb? Like,
no, but it just seems unnecessary, is what I'm trying to say. Is that like
that's the thing. And the difference between it being necessary and unnecessary is that my pussy is a month old and yours came in built in. Like, it's one of my favorite things. It's like, well, genes and whatever, like, so men and women are different. And I'm like, listen, I have learned through firsthand experience that I still have all the titty genes that exist in my family. It's just I didn't turn them on when everybody else did, and I did so later in life. So, both cis men and women, your husband could have the same genes to grow like actual breast tissue, not just like pecs. But the way the genes work is that he's less likely to do that because of the other parts of the hormones in his body. So the thing that blows my mind most about this surgery, the coolest and weirdest thing, I still don't know what it's like to have a uterus. I don't know what it's like to shed uterine lining and have that come out. That's still, but, and I go back to the pee thing, but it's not just that. I had a friend who was like, I couldn't imagine what a dick is like. I was like, okay, here we are. We're doing a meditation exercise, right? If you've ever been, this might be TMI, but if you are a person with a vagina and you've ever been aroused and you can feel like any stiff in your clit, or it feeling hard, or if you can feel that sensation in your body, basically just you're stimulated and you can feel how different your clitoris feels on the inside of your body. Take that and have it extend outside of your body. And it is weirdly, I was surprised. It's like, wow, this like feels like if I was more aware of the part of my penis that was erect while it was inside my body and not just outside of my body. Which is weird to think about, but it's like, I've had enough of experience where I can be like, I can understand a little bit more of what a person born with a vagina or has a clitoris could feel like. Again, not the same. And how I can compare that to how I felt before a little bit. So I have a potentially new way to relate how certain things feel or how things related before because of the new experience,
Mhm.
right?
I can say as a cis woman, I have never thought about having a penis, never cared to know. And
And that's fine.
that's
And that's
what cis
totally
is.
fine.
That is what being cis is. I have no concept of it, don't give a shit, and don't care. And that has a lot of privilege because I know there are a lot of women born with vaginas that wish they knew what it was like to have a penis. So
But that's the thing is, and you're absolutely right, but the thing is, to some of those people, depending on how I word it, I can actually provide an insight into what that's like. I could think of metaphors to give them some understanding that I can now that I just had no context before. Let me tell you, nothing, listen, I was kind of a loser, supposed to be a little straight boy. I was so paranoid. I grew up with so many jokes about like, oh, you can't find the clitoris. Oh, the clitoris is so hard to find. I'm like, I have poor eyes. I have ADHD. I thought I was like, oh my God, I'm going to be such a bad partner. I'm not going to know. There is no reason for that joke to exist, period. There's no reason. It is not. And
how
I'm
old
talking
are
about
you, Izzy?
before I
How
had the
old are you?
surgery.
No, but for real, how
Not,
old are you? How old are you?
I was a teenager. I mean,
No, but how old are you now?
oh, I'm not quite 30 yet.
Yeah, no, like half of the stuff that in your teens and 20s are such like, and it actually, it's painful that we wasted our time even thinking about this stuff and making these stupid jokes. I mean, most people are starting their families in their 20s, even if it's by accident. And think of how much better parents they could have been without all of this stupid baggage of bullshittery that I don't know if it was Hollywood who made up this shit, but
Oh yeah. I
it's a
think
waste.
there's blame to be passed around. But or just it's not all one group. It's how the cultures exist together.
Yeah.
This is the thing I wanted to say. Even as in the closet and like taking the big brew of misogyny and all that other stuff like everybody else, it still seemed weird to me that the right to choose was centered around the fetus's life and then kind of dismissing about all of the things in the mother's life that led up to that moment. For pro-life, we should be caring about the person who holds the baby too, right?
You know, a
And
lot of
I
people
thought
say
when I
after I had a baby that I would become more pro-life, but the irony was the opposite, is that I actually became way more pro-choice because I was fucking livid, livid that I had this baby and I didn't have autonomy in the delivery room. I was livid about it. So much so that I worked with Manmeet Bular to get midwifery funded because
wow,
men
good for you.
having
That's
their
awesome.
way in the delivery room is fucking rape. And I don't give a flying fuck if you have a doctor's degree that says you're an OBGYN. You are a fucking rapist that's certified by everybody in this society to do whatever the fuck you want to me and my vagina. And that's fucking wrong. And I have no fucks to give for this anymore.
And
None.
the same culture that says that's given you all of these things is the same culture that to even begin to ask whether I can get a vagina, it's the, two doctors. It's not just one. You got to go through two. You have to be out for a year. And I think some of those things, one of the, I could talk forever, but one of the most absurd experiences I've ever had. And like, I've only been out for like 5 years, or well, I've been on hormones for 4. So I've been out for 3, contemplating this stuff for 5 years, hormones for 4, Canadian blood services. Because I went with the family member. There's the whole thing about, well, they've cut it down now to like, you can't be a man, have sex with another man. It's like 6 months or whatever before, like you have to be celibate for 6 months before you donate blood. And this is before I had surgery. And I'm like, okay, most of the people I know are trans women. I'm a trans woman. And a lot of us like women. If I sleep with another trans woman who also hasn't had surgery, do we fall under that? Do you consider us men having sex with men?
It's bullshit. It's just controlling you. And I'll tell you why. I'm a hetero woman. I'm telling you, men fuck everybody all the time, all the time. Like this is bullshit. Heterosexual men are fucking everybody all the time. Like if you're a trucker, you're fucking everyone across the fucking country. If you're a boilermaker, you're fucking over here, you're fucking over there, you're fucking over here. And you're what gives you some fucking, oh, but you're married to a woman. Oh, so all those hookers or sorry, sex workers over here, or all those sex workers over here, or your second wife over here, that somehow negates you? Was there some kind of shield, kind of like Jason Kenney, like all the kids can go to school and not get the COVID-19, but you know, I can't go work out because I'd not get the COVID-19.
Remember the personal responsibility thing. He doesn't have to take any personal responsibility. He washes his hands, even though he controls the Albertan levers of power. So you get in trouble because you didn't follow the rules, but he didn't have to do anything.
No, it's just embedded misogyny in the blood donation system, because the bottom line is that men are screwing everybody, but because my husband is married and assumed to be in a monogamous relationship, like it's insane to me that married men are somehow assumed to be monogamous. It's insane to me.
The guys who write that as they are not being monogamous. But this is the thing that got me at that particular thing. I asked the questions of Canadian Blood Services while I was there. They scoured, they looked for their bosses, because I filled out and I was just like, well, I just want to make sure, like I want to know. The only thing they could find about trans people at all, and it was if trans women had the surgery. That was the only thing they cared about. And so it was this weird thing where all the things you were saying that were true, but it was one of the few spaces that as a trans woman, I could have been sleeping with men or other trans girls like me, which would have been two people with penises having sex, and yet we would not have been persecuted the same way as a gay man was, which was weird. And the thing that kills me on that was, there was something else about that too, was that they test you for the stuff anyway.
Yeah.
Like they're going to test you for HIV, for AIDS,
syphilis,
for those
all sorts of shit.
All of those things. So the more I had a friend of mine who's trans and was born with a uterus, and I think like their experience too was really, they highlighted a bunch of their issues which were different but that had some overlap, and it just made me think like, but if we're all answering the surveys as honestly as we can, and you're going to test it anyway, why not? And there may be pieces to it. It's like, well, we run specific tests in these specific times. Well, just if they run anything that's at risk, just test it. And if you can't use it, then like, what if I had lied and said that I like had one of those diseases? They tested it. They would have not donated that blood to somebody. Like, so to me, the stipulation about men sleeping with other men, there's no point to it. Because if you're going to run the tests anyway.
I gotta wrap this up, my friend. We've been on almost 2 hours, so
I know.
Start wrapping this up.
Take out the best parts. I just like.
Oh no, I don't. I can't. I can't do it. We just go with it. So I'm just gonna start wrapping this up because Yeah, it's just I know
Well,
we
I could talk forever. I love chatting with you. You're so awesome. So
well,
that's, yeah.
the bottom line is that I wanted you to have an opportunity to talk about your journey, and you're welcome back on my show anytime to talk about things that you want to talk about. And I think it was most important that we talked about Trans Day of Remembrance because that is coming up. And I think that, you know, I talk about missing and murdered Indigenous women, and people need to see why it is this issue matters so much as part of our conversation. Because you can't be talking about missing and murdered Indigenous trans, you can't without having this conversation. So it was really important. And if people send me questions, of course, I'll send them to you so that you can see them and decide what you want to do with that. But maybe that's what I'll ask people to, put together. I'll put together all the questions and we'll have you back and I'll give
And
them.
I'll see, yeah, and answer them more specifically and less rambly. That might help too.
Yeah,
The
but I just
Yes.
again I just want you to know how angry in solidarity with you I am that there's any discrimination when it comes to the blood bank and the blood donation issue, and I think it just shows what a ridiculous society we continue to live in, that we just can't accept these things. So,
And
but
all I
with
want to, yes.
that,
Okay. I want to say one last thing. I
sure,
want to say one last thing. The thing is, I didn't want to completely center myself, but the reason is I want to tell people about that we can have narratives for trans people that are not just us being victims of violence.
no,
There can be something else. And I want too that I want other trans people to have some of the good experiences I have too. Like it's got to be more than just not letting them be murdered. It's that, and that I want them to thrive, and I want us all to thrive, and I want you guys to thrive as well. And that's the thing for me. I want to spread the good. I want the good to be spread around, and I want it to be made more environmentally friendly and accessible to everyone. That has to happen too. That's all I will say. That'll be my final thoughts on that. Okay.
well, thank you, Izzy. And as I go through my ending, because you've actually listened to my show, if you want to
Yes.
pop in something, don't hesitate to say something, because I want to make sure that this ending is as inclusive as it should be. So
Yes. Okay.
yes, Indigenous have been talking about our issues, sharing our traumas in reports, commissions, and in public hearings, just so it can be regularly disregarded. No more. Honor our words. Honor the treaties. Listen to politicians and their platforms and policies. If they don't recognize the marginalized in their budget with Gender Equity Plus, if they're cutting violence prevention programs and services, Indigenous education, uterus health choices, gay straight alliances, lack for human rights for migrants, immigrants, folks with disabilities, know that your vote to that party directly negatively impacts marginalized people. Demand that they implement
Yes.
the Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action, the recommendations of the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples, the multiple reports on child welfare reform, violence prevention, and now we have 231 calls to justice from the National Inquiry on Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, Girls, and Two-Spirit. Denying those reports is a form of abuse called gaslighting. Our people are
Mm-hmm.
experiencing extreme racism in the educational, justice, and health institutions, with multiple reports that say the same things. Demand change from election platforms and politicians. If they do not understand colonialism, racism, privilege, sexism, they literally have zero business running. Should be understood by all parties, all local politicians, community organizations, sports clubs. A really great article I said out loud in 62 was Truth Before Truth, how non-Indigenous Canadians become allies. And I'm pretty sure we're seeing Izzy give a great example of what that looks like.
Don't talk me. I could be just as human and problematic as anybody else, but I appreciate that. Thank
As I
you.
can as a straight cis. So I want to
Yes.
continue to put cultural safety into action by creating a safer space for all people. Let's look at it as first aid for marginalized. Do something. Having good intentions is not enough. Take action to make change. Speak out against racism. Ask questions with those with more understanding. Find allies. Create a support system for yourself so that you can advocate for culturally safe approaches. Take responsibility for your learning. Read, reflect, ask questions. Do not expect this learning to always come from racialized people. Take time for self-reflection. Be aware of your own assumptions and biases. Question everything you've learned about Indigenous people and take steps to actively disrupt those stereotypes and commit to lifelong learning. Be prepared to be uncomfortable. Understanding colonialism and the legacy of racism is an ongoing and difficult task. And I want to say thank you to heretohelp.bc.ca for what is cultural or what is Indigenous cultural safety and why I should care about it. As what I just said, internalized racism and lateral violence is another form of violence Indigenous and marginalized people experience by the structure of racism imposed on these lands. Another great resource is racialequitytools.org. What is internalized racism by Donna Bevins. You know, we're constantly talking about that. I think Izzy spoke a lot about internalized issues when it came to transphobia and trans issues. And I think that we as Indigenous people need to question the racism that we've internalized. Another great resource is from the American Friends Service Committee. They have do's and don'ts for bystander intervention when it comes to witnessing public instances of racism, anti-Black, anti-Muslim, anti-trans, or other forms of oppressive interpersonal violence and harassment with these tips on how to intervene. So make your presence known as a witness, make eye contact with the person being harassed, you talk to them, ask them if they want support, move closer to the person. If possible, you feel like you're safe to do so, create a barrier between the person being harassed. If it's safe to do so and the person consents, film or record the incident because it's a lot easier to delete that later than it is to wish you had it. And I have found time and time again, recording actually de-escalates a situation because most people are embarrassed to be on film, that idiot. So
yeah,
right.
true.
Cues from the person being harassed. If they're already engaging, listen to them. You know, you can make suggestions. You want to move to another train car? Do you want for them to leave you alone? But follow their lead. Honor their way of resisting. Don't tone police. And what that means, especially for white people, is don't tell them, oh, you need to be more quiet or whatever. If somebody is telling me I'm a squaw, I am going to tell them to shut the fuck up as loud as I possibly can. And I don't care because I need people to look and I need people to go, oh shit, this woman is having problems from this guy. We need to intervene.
Yes, absolutely.
So that's why you have to not tone police people. Anyway, follow up with the person being harassed after the incident is over. I know how embarrassing that can be. So I just ask that you give them your card in some way, shape, or form, and do what you have to do to keep your both of you safe. Assess your surroundings. Maybe there are others you can pull in, which is why being loud sometimes works. Working in a team is a good idea. So if you can move to a safer place, do so. Do not call the police. For many communities experiencing harassment right now, the police can cause a greater danger for the person being harassed. Do not escalate the situation. The goal is to get the person being harassed to safety and to not incite further violence from the attacker. Don't do nothing. Silence is dangerous. It communicates approval, leaves the victim high and dry. If you ever find yourself too nervous or afraid to speak out, move closer to the person being harassed to communicate your support with your body. And teach your kids about accountability in a positive way because these kids are learning white supremacy through the educational system and through you and through society, through media, through newspapers. They are learning this. So you have to unlearn it. And I think Izzy gave great examples of how all of us as a society is learning transphobia and it needs to be undone in media. It needs to be countered by us as people, especially if you're a parent. So if you are experiencing emotional distress and want to talk, call the First Nation and Inuit Hope for Wellness helpline at 1-855-242-3310. It's toll free, open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And if you're a texter, hopeforwellness.ca has an option for you. Violence is my everyday reality. Every Indigenous generation has faced it. That's why I started this podcast to speak freely without interruption, without tone police, without leadership shaming, without gaslighting questions, as many people don't want to hear Indigenous opinion, sure want to tell us theirs. by people who know nothing about Indigenous, colonialism, the constant surveillance of Indigenous people, our protests, our vigils, our rights, microaggressions, people dealing with internalized racism, people who are gatekeepers that survive off the status quo. And then there are people who are really in their trauma and stop people from being able to do good work and deplete personal resources. Internal and external racism is an everyday reality for Indigenous people. That's why I needed this podcast as a boundary to be heard. Thank you to my ancestors, my granny, my mom, of what strength looks like through your example. I want to thank my dad for teaching me to be strong and blunt, my stepmom for showing me what a proud culture is through her Austrian family and roots and teaching me to be a proud Calgarian. It is through her I am a second generation proud Calgarian. Thank you to my husband for producing and editing this show, on top of being my husband, my childhood friend, the father of our child, and support down my journey of the Red Road. He has witnessed decades of racism and sexism. And to our child, who we are blessed to learn from every day, we are honored you chose us. You give me daily accountability to be a better and stronger person. And I hope my daughter and my family will be proud in the future of us trying to discuss these present day issues in a way that they can understand. Again, my Patreon account is Native Calgarian, where you can pledge and support. Thank you, Adam, Agent Indian, Alexandria, Beatrice, Ben, Beth, Brian, Kat, Celine, Christina, Crystal, Diana, Jacqueline, Jenny, Jana, Jenny, Jessica, Jocelyn, Judy, Karen, Kathy, Kenna, Leah, Lisi, Marisa, Melissa, Morami, Natalie, Nathan, Rebecca, Rochelle, The Sprawl, Shara, Sharon, Tammy, Tiffany, Thayla, Vanessa, and Veronica. Thank you all for signing up. If you did one donation or many and had to quit for financial reasons, please know I appreciate your support too. And if you value listening and can afford to give, thank you. For those that cannot afford to give but listen in, love to hear from you at nativeyyc@gmail.com, where you can send in your comments and your questions, and you can go to nativecalgarian.com for the latest podcast and pin posts on social media. And I want to end by giving side-eye to those Calgary rabbits. You're lucky I'm not Tradish. And my beautiful cousin would respond, or you'd be in my dish. Thank you for listening.